Ladies and gentlemen, have you ever noticed that some of the strongest, most grounded people you'll ever meet are the ones who choose to walk alone? Not because they've been abandoned, not because they're antisocial or broken, but because somewhere along the way they discovered a truth that most people spend their whole lives avoiding. That peace is more valuable than company. That silence can be a sanctuary, and that solitude, when embraced, becomes a superpower. There is a quiet strength in choosing yourself, a rare kind of courage in deciding to stand alone, not out of fear, but out of deep, unshakable self-respect. While the world runs in circles trying to feel whole, chasing relationships, distractions, noise, applause, some people realize they're already whole. They stop looking outward for completion and turn inward for connection. They look in the mirror not with longing, but with certainty. And they say, I complete me. Living alone mentally, emotionally, even physically isn't a sentence. It's a liberation. It means you no longer fear your own thoughts. You no longer run from your past. And you no longer fill your life with shallow conversations and empty connections just to avoid being alone with yourself. Because you've come to understand something vital. Solitude doesn't weaken you. It strengthens you. Some relationships deplete your energy more than being alone ever could. In fact, when you choose solitude, you eliminate the constant draining pull of trying to maintain relationships that don't align with your soul. You reclaim your time. You protect your space. You move through life without having to constantly ask for permission or explain your vision to someone who doesn't understand your fire. You wake up each morning without tension in your chest. You don't brace yourself for another day of being misunderstood, overlooked, or underestimated. Instead, you rise with peace. You move with clarity. You live with intention. And that's where your power begins. Because when you live alone, you get to decide how your life unfolds. No more debates about where the dishes go or compromising your passions to keep the peace. No more silencing your voice just to avoid confrontation. You get to design your space for you. You get to build routines that nourish your growth, not to slow it down. If you want to start working at 5 in the morning or go for a walk under the stars at midnight, no explanations are needed. You're free to move in alignment with your own rhythm. That kind of autonomy does something to you. It trains your mind. It builds discipline. It creates a sense of order and strength that most people never experience because they're too busy adjusting themselves to fit into someone else's chaos. In solitude, you stop reacting and start creating. You stop managing other people's moods and start listening to your own needs. You learn to respond to your life with wisdom instead of impulse. And perhaps the most beautiful part of it all, you begin to hear your own voice again. In relationships that aren't aligned, your voice gets quieter over time. Your truth becomes something you whisper instead of something you stand on. You compromise again and again until you barely recognize who you've become. But when you're alone, truly alone, you start to listen not to the noise of the world, but to the wisdom inside you. You reconnect with your inner compass. You sharpen your intuition. You begin making decisions not based on fear or guilt, but based on truth. People confuse being alone with being lost. But the truth is, some of the most found, most spiritually grounded, most emotionally rich people are the ones who've walked the longest roads by themselves. They've cried alone, healed alone, rebuilt alone, and risen stronger than ever before. They've built a life that's rooted in authenticity, a life where their soul can breathe. Not just survive, but truly breathe deeply, freely, unapologetically. Living alone teaches you to pour into yourself. It teaches you that you don't have to be everything for someone else in order to be worthy. You don't need to fix, save, or shrink yourself to be loved. You are already worthy just as you are. And when you stop trying to carry other people's weight, you finally have the strength to carry your own purpose. Because real freedom doesn't come from escape. It comes from ownership, from standing in your truth even when it's uncomfortable, from owning your space, your thoughts, your direction, your peace. When you live alone, you stop waiting for someone to choose you. You realize you've already been chosen by you. And that's more than enough. There is no applause, no standing ovation, no one clapping in the background. And that's okay. You're not here for the show. You're here for the shift, the internal transformation that happens when you finally stop chasing approval and start choosing alignment. When you walk alone, you become dangerous to anything that tried to distract, diminish, or define you because you no longer need the noise to feel alive. You've tapped into something deeper, something timeless, something untouchable. So, if you've ever felt like walking away from the noise, if you've ever felt more yourself in solitude than you did in a crowd, trust that instinct. If you've ever felt stronger on your own than around people who couldn't see your worth, that's not a weakness. That's your soul calling you home. That's the voice of transformation whispering, you don't have to settle. This is your moment to rise, to return to your power, to stop shrinking and start becoming. Not someone else's version of success, but your own highest vision of who you were born to be. And it all starts in the quiet, in the solitude, in the decision to no longer betray yourself just to feel accepted. Because the truth is, peace is the most powerful thing you can protect. And once you find it, you never trade it for friction again. You never beg for belonging. You never compromise your truth to keep people who were never meant to walk your path. You simply walk forward, alone, perhaps, but stronger than ever. This is what limitless motivation looks like. It's not loud, it's not flashy, it's not desperate, it's rooted, it's still. It's unwavering. And it begins the moment you realize that walking alone is not the end of the journey. It's the beginning of becoming unstoppable. When you live alone, silence stops feeling awkward, it becomes sacred. What once may have felt empty or uncomfortable transforms into something profound. In that silence, you begin to hear everything you've been drowning out for years. The noise of other people's opinions, the distractions that numbed you, the surface-level relationships that drained you, the smiles you forced just to get through the day. All of it fades. And what remains is stillness. Finally, the room is still. And for the first time in a long time, your thoughts are no longer competing for space. They're not suffocating under pressure. They're breathing, expanding, rising to the surface with clarity and strength. That's when it hits you how much energy you've spent trying to be understood, trying to explain yourself to people who never really wanted to know you, trying to be seen by people who only looked at what you could offer them. That kind of emotional labor doesn't just tire you, it empties you. Piece by piece, you give yourself away until there's nothing left but the shell of someone who once had dreams, passion, fire. But when you're alone, everything changes. The confusion begins to dissolve, the fog starts to lift, and for the first time, clarity walks in, not as a whisper, not as a fleeting thought, but as a presence steady and undeniable. You stop guessing who you are. You stop outsourcing your identity to the people around you. You stop performing. No more pretending you're okay just to keep the peace. No more walking on eggshells, smiling through tension, absorbing energy that was never yours to carry. There's no one there to misread your silence. No one projecting their pain onto your presence. It's just you and truth. And there's a beauty in that, an honesty that most people never experience. Because living alone removes the static. It strips life down to its core. You no longer need to sort through the mess to find what matters. You're already standing in it. And what you discover is something most people live their whole lives avoiding. Peace isn't found in comfort. It's not in the distractions. Not in the convenience of being surrounded. It's not in noise. Peace is found in clarity. And clarity only comes when the world gets quiet. But let's be honest, When you're constantly surrounded by people, especially the wrong ones, their voices start to cloud your mind. You begin to second guess yourself. You hesitate even on things you once knew deep in your gut. And slowly, you forget what your own voice sounds like. But when you're alone, you recalibrate. You begin to hear that inner voice again. And this time it doesn't whisper. It commands. It speaks with authority. It tells you what needs to be done. It points you toward your next level. It reminds you of your worth. And without the weight of someone else's expectations, without the emotional noise clouding your thoughts, you actually start to move with purpose, with precision, with power. You're no longer seeking approval. You're no longer waiting for permission. You're no longer dimming your flame so others can feel comfortable in their shadows. See, people go looking for clarity in relationships and feedback and validation. They chase it through social approval, romantic attachments, groupthink, but they never find it. Because clarity doesn't live there. Clarity lives in solitude. In those quiet mornings, when the sun hasn't yet risen, and it's just you, your breath, and your thoughts. It lives in the silence of midnight, when the world is asleep, and you finally hear the rhythm of your soul without interference. Living alone gives you that sacred space, that protected environment where truth isn't distorted, where vision becomes sharp, and where you finally see yourself as you are, without filters, without projections, without judgment. And once you've seen life clearly, it's impossible to go back to chaos. Once you've tasted that peace, you no longer accept confusion. That's why living alone isn't a retreat. It's a revolution. It's not stepping back. It's stepping forward into a version of yourself that most people never meet because they're too busy avoiding discomfort to find truth. Clarity demands courage. It demands that you stand still when the world is moving fast, that you look inward when everything else tells you to look out. But when you choose that path, when you choose solitude, you begin to choose yourself in ways you never have before. You stop asking for permission to be who you are. You stop negotiating your peace just to keep a connection. You no longer feel the need to explain why you crave quiet, why you choose discipline over distraction, why your life no longer revolves around pleasing others. You simply live freely, fully, truthfully. And that freedom, that's rare because most people are carrying someone else's emotional weight, living on someone else's schedule, molding themselves to someone else's mood. But when it's just you, everything changes. You move when you're ready. You rise when your soul commands it. You do what needs to be done. Not later, not someday, but now. No agreement required, no validation necessary. You want to wake up at 400 a.m. and dive into your craft in silence, you do it. You want to pray in the dark or meditate under moonlight, you do it. You're not living on anyone else's emotional clock. You're not waiting for understanding. And that kind of freedom, that kind of self-governed existence unlocks something powerful inside of you. You become dangerous in the best way. Because once you've learned to live without needing validation, no one can manipulate you with it. Once you've felt peace, chaos can't seduce you. And once you've stood in your own truth, no one can ever make you question it again. You stop shrinking to fit into rooms that were never built for your spirit. You stop walking into spaces where your authenticity has to be negotiated. You stop dimming your light to keep others from feeling insecure. You begin to live boldly, loudly, unapologetically, and not just for attention, but from alignment, from knowing who you are and why you're here. And here's what people rarely admit. Even the perfect relationships often come with invisible chains. You start making compromises, small at first. You skip a morning routine. You hold your tongue. You downplay your ambition. You shift your focus from what fuels you to what pleases them. You trade your fire for their comfort. You surrender your rhythm for their expectations. That's not love. That's emotional imprisonment disguised as connection. But when you're alone, truly alone, You learn something sacred. You learn how to choose yourself, not just once, but daily. You learn that your routines, your energy, your clarity, your truth, those things are non-negotiable. You learn that peace isn't something you have to earn. It's something you protect. And you realize that being alone was never about lacking love. It was about building the kind of love that starts within. Because once you found clarity in solitude, confusion loses its grip. Once you've experienced freedom, dependence feels suffocating. And once you've tasted the power of walking your path alone, no one can ever make you settle for less again. You begin to move without hesitation. No second guessing, no shrinking, no diluting your voice to make others more comfortable. You speak without filtering your truth, without wondering how it will be received, or if it will offend the fragile egos of people who never really heard you anyway. You start to heal, not by escaping, not by numbing, not by being patched up through someone else's presence, but by sitting with yourself fully and honestly without interference. And somewhere in that silence something begins to emerge. A rhythm, a divine rhythm, one that doesn't rush, one that doesn't compete, one that doesn't need to keep up with anyone else's pace because it's finally tuned to your own. That's what solitude gives you. The permission to stop running someone else's race, to stop sprinting in shoes that were never made for your path. When you live alone, you stop being pulled into other people's timelines. You stop measuring your life by someone else's milestones. You stop looking over your shoulder for validation. And instead, you lock in. You zero in on your lane, your growth, your voice. That's the difference. You begin to trust your own pace. You learn to honor your inner voice, the one you used to ignore when the world got too loud. You follow your instincts without asking for permission, without needing to be co-signed, without needing anyone to agree. Living alone reintroduces you to parts of yourself you forgot existed. It reminds you that you are capable, intuitive, powerful, not because someone else said so, but because you've seen it for yourself. And once you taste that kind of freedom, that kind of self-sourced power, surface-level companionship no longer holds the same shine. You see it clearly for what it is. Temporary, shallow, often distracting. And you no longer crave what doesn't nourish you. Because real freedom doesn't knock. It doesn't wait to be welcomed. It doesn't need a stage. It walks into the room, owns its presence, and speaks truth even if no one claps. There's a reason why the tallest, strongest trees grow far from the chaos. Why they thrive in the wilderness, away from the crowd. It's because they're rooted deep and quiet, undisturbed. And that's exactly what happens when you live alone. You step away from the chaos and into the silence. And in that silence you don't just exist. You grow deeply, organically, powerfully. Noise, for all its volume, does one thing: it distracts. It keeps you in reaction mode, chasing validation, trapped in cycles that don't elevate you. But when you strip it away, when you sit alone in a room with nothing but your thoughts and your reflection, you finally face what you've been avoiding. You face the truth, and in that truth you face yourself. That's where real growth begins. Not in the books, not in the quotes, not in someone else's wisdom, but in the quiet confrontation between who you are and who you're meant to be. Most people run from that kind of silence. They fear what it might reveal. But when you live alone, there's no one left to hide behind, no one to blame, no noise to mask the pain. It's just you, your choices, your habits, your dreams, your demons. And in that raw, unfiltered reality, you either crumble or you rise. And if you're intentional, if you're committed, if you're honest with yourself, you rise. This kind of growth doesn't look glamorous. It's not flashy. It won't trend. You don't post it. You live it. It's not the kind of transformation that comes with applause or public recognition. It's the quiet, consistent discipline of becoming someone solid. Someone who doesn't need to announce their worth because it shows in how they carry themselves. Someone who doesn't need attention to feel validated because they've already met themselves in the dark and didn't flinch. You begin to notice your emotional triggers not because someone pointed them out, but because you've watched yourself respond in real time. You start to learn your rhythms. You find when you're most creative, when you need silence, when you need sleep, when you're vulnerable. When you're powerful, you stop performing and start aligning. And that alignment becomes your foundation. Steady, grounded, unshakable. And the best part, no one can take that from you because it wasn't gifted. It wasn't borrowed. It wasn't handed to you in a moment of comfort. It was earned in the stillness, built through consistency, forged in quiet mornings and long lonely nights when no one was watching. But you showed up anyway. That's what real power is. The kind that doesn't demand a spotlight, but cannot be ignored. Living alone teaches you that growth isn't about adding more. It's about subtracting, removing the distractions, letting go of the noise, cutting ties with anything that keeps you playing small. And in that subtraction you find something rare: space to think, space to dream, space to evolve, space to finally become. Because growth doesn't happen in crowded rooms full of opinions. It happens in solitude. It happens in silence. In those sacred still moments where you stop running and start reflecting, where you stop seeking and start becoming, where you stop avoiding and start facing everything head on. That's where the shift happens. That's where transformation begins. Living alone resets your standards. It recalibrates your sense of what's worth your time, your energy, your presence. You realize just how peaceful life can be when it's no longer cluttered with drama, half-effort, or one-sided relationships. You realize you don't need chaos to feel connected. You don't need to beg for effort or explain why you deserve consistency. You become the full source of your own peace. And once you taste that kind of wholeness, you stop settling for crumbs. You stop answering messages from people who only reach out when they need something. You stop chasing those who never made space for you. You stop trying to convince anyone of your worth because you already proved it to yourself. You showed up when no one else did. You held space for your own healing. You stood in the storm without anyone holding your hand. And now you don't need their approval. You don't need their validation. You've already chosen you. Living alone teaches you something that most people never understand. It shows you the difference between loneliness and solitude. Loneliness is the absence of connection. But solitude, that's freedom, that's clarity, that's the rare ability to hear your own voice, unfiltered, undiluted, undistracted by everyone else's opinions. And once you've heard that voice, your true voice, you don't silence it again, because you've become someone grounded, someone whole, someone who no longer fears silence, but reveres it, someone who no longer chases but chooses, someone who doesn't just survive the quiet, but thrives in it. You learn to love your own company so deeply, so completely that anything less than real effort from others feels like a violation of your peace. What once might have passed as acceptable now feels out of place, disrespectful, even insulting, not because you've become rigid or cold, but because you've finally learned how to treat yourself right. And once you've experienced that kind of self-respect, it becomes your standard. You no longer crave someone to fill the silence because you've discovered the strength that lives inside it. You've built a life that doesn't depend on anyone to complete you. You don't need someone to save you. You don't need a presence to validate your existence. You've done the work, you've filled your own gaps. And because of that, you see things differently now. You start to notice what adds value and what quietly steals from it. You recognize when someone's energy doesn't align with yours. You spot inconsistency not just in what they do, but in what they don't do. You hear the gaps between their words and their actions. And instead of bending, instead of justifying, instead of hoping they'll change, you create distance. Not from bitterness, not from anger, but from self-respect. Because you've grown tired of maybe, tired of kind of, tired of only when it's convenient. You require presence. You require clarity. You require consistency. And you're not ashamed of that. You've earned that expectation because you know what it took to get here. You remember the nights you fought battles no one saw. You remember building your vision alone brick by brick while the world kept moving while others turned their backs. You remember carrying your pain quietly, showing up anyway. You did the work. You kept going, and now you're not about to let someone walk into that sacred space you built with laziness, indecision, or half-love. You've become the gatekeeper of your own peace. And the standard to enter, it's not low. It was forged through solitude and sacrifice. It was built in the dark when no one was clapping. That's why the bare minimum doesn't move you. Just showing up isn't enough. If they want to stay, they have to match what you've created when no one was watching. This is the silent power of living alone. It sharpens your discernment. You stop choosing people based on potential and start choosing them based on purpose. You start surrounding yourself with people who bring peace, not problems. People who speak clarity, not confusion. People who add calm to your life, not chaos. And if those people never come, you're still good because you're not waiting for someone to rescue you. You already did that. You already pulled yourself from the fire. And when you live from that place of power, manipulation loses its grip. Desperation dies. You become untouchable in the best way. Living alone doesn't just elevate your standards for others. It brings you face to face with yourself. It forces you to confront the parts of you that relationships often help you hide. When there's no one else in the room, you can't shift blame. You can't lean on someone else's emotional strength. You can't distract yourself with small talk or shared routines. It's just you, your choices, your thoughts, your regrets, your patterns. And that silence, it becomes the mirror. It becomes the medicine. It becomes the place where truth no longer has anywhere to hide. And for the first time, healing isn't something you talk about. It's something you live. It's not a hashtag, not a buzzword, not a curated post. It's a lifestyle. When you live alone, there's no noise to cover the wounds. There's no audience to perform for. You feel your emotions in real time. You sit with your fears instead of running from them. You revisit your past, not to stay stuck in it, but to finally process it. Healing in solitude is raw, it's uncomfortable. It's not glamorous, but it's real. You learn how to soothe your own anxiety. You figure out your triggers not from theory, but from lived experience. You become your own support system, your own voice of reason, your own place of peace. That's power. Because now no one can use your brokenness against you. No one can twist your emotions to control you. You've already gone through the fire and come out whole. There's something sacred about healing alone. You're not performing for applause. You're not updating anyone on your progress. You're doing the work quietly, consistently. You're crying in silence when you need to. You're forgiving yourself for the mistakes you made in survival mode. You're releasing people who left when you needed them most. And you're slowly uncovering the real version of yourself. Not the version others molded. Not the one shaped by codependency or trauma, but the version that's been waiting to rise beneath all the compromise. You start building routines that protect your energy. You don't dump your emotions. You process them. You journal instead of explode. You pray. You meditate. You create sacred space within your day to check in with your spirit. You become intentional about your healing. Not just so you can survive, but so you can thrive. So that when someone eventually walks into your life, they're not walking into confusion. They're walking into a home built on stability, a foundation you created not in chaos, but in clarity. And because of that, you stop repeating patterns. The toxic relationships that used to attract you now look like red flags. Chaos no longer excites you. It exhausts you. Dysfunction doesn't feel familiar anymore, it feels foreign. And that's how you know you've grown. You don't entertain what drains you just to avoid being alone. You don't chase connection at the cost of self-respect because you're no longer afraid of your own company. In fact, you treasure it. You honor